Evening, Dave. How are you, sir? What a day. It has just absolutely chucked it down here today. Everything is soaked to the skin. I think we even had a hailstorm earlier on. Beautiful. We'll see where our friend is. He should be here in a minute. Yeah, I'm on. Ah, you're here. Yeah, if you, there we go. Oh, Glenn's here as well. Glenn, let me know what time tomorrow, mate, while you're here. We need to get down that garage tomorrow, Glenn, with the ball. See what we can do.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
I can now, yeah, perfect.
Perfect. That was a little easier than last time. I'm getting good at this.
Well, you're a professional now. You must have been on all week doing different things.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I live my life on Zoom meeting right now. That's my whole life. It's crazy.
Mad, isn't it?
I know. I teach my classes at the university on Zoom meeting, so that's like 4.5 hours a week, or no more than that, 6 hours a week. And then I do the webinars for Suncalous another 2 hours a week, and then all the meetings and whatever. Yeah, it's like my whole life I'm talking to my computer.
It's mad though, isn't it, how much you can do on a computer?
I know. It's true. Yeah, we've gotten a lot accomplished, so that's good.
I mean, if we didn't have this medium to communicate with.
Right. Can you imagine, yeah, if this happened 10 years ago or whatever, we would...
everything would come to a standstill, wouldn't it?
I know, right, exactly. That's crazy.
What's going on?
They picked the right time for this thing to happen, I guess.
Oh, yeah, but I thought, are you starting to come out the other side of that?
A little bit, yeah. Things are starting to open up now, but yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. Whether people keep saying there could be another wave of it, and then they have to shut down again. So who knows? I mean, things are starting to open up now, but I don't know if people are going to be, out in full force. Who knows?
Well,
who knows?
We are getting the documentation through saying procedures for opening.
Yeah.
I know the kids' academy football season's just been cancelled.
Cancelled. Yeah.
Fully cancelled now till next season.
Right.
So, it's be interesting. It's going to be
Who
different.
knows?
It's going to be different as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think like gyms and fitness facilities and sports are going to be some of the last things. People aren't going to be wanting to be breathing hard and sweating all over, with other people close by. So that could be one of the last things that start back up again. But who knows? We'll see.
So then,
yes,
tonight,
yes,
what I wanted to do is I want to find out a bit more about the biomechanics side.
Okay, sure.
More in a scientific standpoint.
Okay.
What's going on?
Sure.
Because I see lots of different things, and I can sit here and talk to you all night about what's going on in the world.
Sure.
I just wanted to get a bit more of an insight into the science side and what's actually happening. And I mean, a lot of yours is all swing catalyst, isn't it? So I kind of want to get my head around how that actually functions.
Sure. So, I mean, I think golf instruction, as I always tell people, was traditionally taught kinematically, right? We would watch a swing with our eyes because they would tell us some information about the motion that happened, and we'd assess for whether it was efficient or not, and then we'd try to fix it. And what we're missing if we look at something kinematically, whether it's with our eyes or with our iPhone or with our video camera or with a 3D motion capture system, so something like Gears or K-Vest or IMM, all those are just measuring motion. And what we know now is, what we know from Isaac Newton basically is that forces cause motion. And so really there's only two places, and what we know from Newton's laws is you need external forces to cause movement. So you need forces external to the object or whatever. And so really our body's only connected to two things, right? Our hands on the club and our feet on the ground when we're swinging a golf club. And so those are the two places where the kinetics can happen. And I know, Dr. Kwan and Sasha work on the hands club end, and they've found a lot of cool stuff. And I mean, the only real issue with the hands club end right now is we can't measure it, right? It's all calculated.
Yeah.
And so they're using something called inverse dynamics, where they measure the motion of the club and they say, well, based on how the club just moved, these forces must have caused it to do that. And so it's all math that predicts what forces must have caused the club to do what it did. Whereas between the feet and the ground, we can actually measure it, right? We're standing on big fancy weight scales that tell us exactly what we're doing to the ground with our feet. And I think when I first started doing biomechanics work, I mean, I think it really helped me to move to California and teach at a university in California, because kids in California, they really want to know how I can use this. Like if they're in class and we teach them about some biomechanical principle, their eyes kind of glaze over and they're like, okay, I mean, great, but how can I use it? Like what's some way that I can actually use this in my real life or in my job to, make somebody better? And I think often we try to complicate things a lot to try to make ourselves sound smart. And I try to do the opposite. I try to simplify things as much as possible to make it useful to basically everyone. And it's hard in golf because there's so much variability in how golfers swing the club, right? There's so many different ways to do it properly. And that's what was getting frustrating for me with doing research was, I was finding all this variability and it still exists. I mean, I was just reading a paper the other day about Dr. Kwan's moments that he calculates between the ground and the center of mass. And the correlations he found the club head speed were really weak. They were relatively low. And so when you find a weak correlation, it means that there's different people are doing different things. And so what you have to do about that is you have to put them in little groups. So you have to say, well, based on these factors, I can put a little circle around these guys and say, well, I got to teach these people appropriately. I got to do something different with them and to them. And so basically what we were finding with the Suncalous is I've kind of broken down all the information, because it gives you a ton of information, this plate that you stand on, into three basic kind of forces that you can produce when you're swinging. So there's like a side-to-side force, or a swaying force, or we call it a horizontal force. And that's one that I think, a lot of people in the past have said that swaying's bad in golf, to actually, but everybody has some sway. Absolutely every golf swing I've ever met has some translation of the target towards, or the pelvis towards the target in the downswing. And some people need more of it, some people need less of it. And that's up to you as the golf instructor to decide who needs more, who needs less.
So the next, it's there in everybody.
It is there in everybody. Every single. I've never measured a golf swing that doesn't have some sway to it. So there's always some and I mean, I remember, most people were like, oh, George Gankis, he teaches that anti-sway move, right? There's no translation, there's no linear force, but every single one of his players I've ever measured, there's some. It's there. It's small, but it's there. And so it's impossible, I think, it is impossible to swing the golf club without some translation or some swaying motion happening towards the target. And some people need a lot of it. Like I have JB Holmes swing on my 3D plate, and his pelvis literally gets stacked up on top of his right leg, and then it moves all the way over on top of his left leg before he hits it. So I would say and his stance is probably, I don't know how many inches. It'd be, maybe like 2 feet wide or so. And so his pelvis is swinging a good, 1.5 feet, 2 feet basically, which is a lot. I mean, that's, and whereas you see a guy like Bryson DeChambeau, who kind of stays stacked up on top of it, where his doesn't sway that much, but there always is some. And so I think that's your goal as a golf instructor, is to dial that in for each person, figure out how much of that they need. And that's what we can now measure with the Suncalous plate. We can measure how much they're putting into the ground. And if there's too much, then you got to have some drills to dial it down. If there's too little, you got to have some drills to crank it up. And then the second force we get is the torque force, or the rotational force. And that's one where we're using our feet in opposite directions, pushing in opposite directions to create twisting. And that's where, most people have noticed that their trail foot has slipped in their downswing at some point. And so your trail foot is literally in your downswing trying to slide away from the ball. And if I try to slide my foot away from the ball and there's friction between my foot and the ground, that's actually going to shove my trail hip forward with the reaction force. So my action is pushing backwards into the ground or away from the ball, and the reaction force shoves my trail hip forward and rotates me or twists me. And so every single golfer I've ever measured has rotation. They have torque, they have that transverse plane rotation in the downswing too, and it's a measure of the magnitude of it.
So
And we did
so
a
so
sorry.
if Scott, my right foot is pushing backwards in
I
this.
mean, it's more pushing like backwards, like straight back towards
Okay.
away from the I mean there are some people that have a little bit, of sideways push too. I mean that's obviously, but the main component of it that's creating rotation is the straight backwards force. So literally, if your foot slips directly away from the ball, um,
That way.
yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, if you think of how, if you had a water bottle, how would you take the lid off the water bottle, right? You put that way and that way. You push with your finger forward and your thumb back, and that twists the cap off. And that's exactly what your feet are doing to the ground to create rotation in the
I got it.
downswing. Yeah. And so, everybody has that. Absolutely, everybody has that in their golf swings, and it's the magnitude of which you get it. And so we did a massive study at Ping a couple of years ago where they brought in a whole bunch of amateur golfers and just had them swing on the plate, and they measured their impact characteristics with the foresight. They measured the club and the ball, and then they measured the ground reaction forces just to see what was going on. And we found that there was, it was weak, but there was a correlation between the horizontal force and more of an inside out swing direction. So if I'm moving laterally, that's going to drop the club inside a little bit more and make it kind of swing out to the right for a right-hander more. And a more torque player is going to bring the club around the corner more and try to swing more left. And so understanding that, and if you see a player who's, swinging way into out, and that's something that I've worked on quite a bit in my own swing. I struggle with big blocks and hooks, which means my path gets way inside out. And depending on what I do with the face, it could block or it hook. And I think that comes from my ice hockey playing days, because I grew up in Canada. And the first athletic move I made with a stick in my hand was, shooting hockey pucks. And so if you think about that slipping motion that happens with your feet, if you have skates on, you really can't rotate, right? You got to push away from the target and have the ice push you back and move in a linear fashion. So I think that motor pattern is built into me to be a more linear player, which sometimes can get out of control, and I can start hitting big blocks and hooks. And so I've really worked on creating more torque in my swing to try to get that path and get that swing direction more neutralized to avoid that miss. And it makes it a lot easier to me. I mean, one of the things that really helps me a lot, because I think, there's two places where, I mean, ultimately, if you can make a setup change in a golf swing, that's the easiest one to make, because you're going through your checklist and you're getting set up properly. And if you can do things before the club actually leaves and moves away from the ball, that's the easiest change to make. And if that makes a whole bunch of good changes in your swing, that's the perfect one to make. The next easiest place to make a change is in the backswing, because there's more time, right? If you think of the backswing, it's generally like a 3-to-1 ratio to the downswing. So there's 3 times as much time for your brain to adjust and make changes in the backswing. Once you get to the downswing, that thing is so short and so fast. I mean, most of the time we don't have time to make changes in the downswing. So one like lower body cue that's kind of helped me, because if you think about it, on the back or on the downswing, your trail foot is actually trying to pull away from the ball, which puts your hip forward. So what's going to happen in the backswing? Well, the opposite, right? So in the backswing, I'm actually trying to slide my trail foot towards the ball. And that was one of the cues that helped me get a little less glidey or a little less sway in my backswing. So literally my thought when I took the club away was try to shove my foot towards the ball. And that shoved my trail hip backwards and kind of got me more turned behind it and less swayed off of it. And that really helped me neutralize my downswing swing direction or path. And so that was just, a basic knowledge of how torque and rotation is created in the golf swing. And to me, I'll never have, if you, I've got some questions coming in here. How do you balance the horizontal and torque forces? I mean, I think they're kind of a trade-off, right? Generally, the more horizontal you get, the less rotational you get, and the more rotational, the less horizontal you get. And that would be a question of, I think, the bioswing dynamics and Mike Adams stuff is the best way to guess before you even, start messing around with the player, what's going to be optimal for them. But then when you do start messing around with the player, just having drills and my buddy Will Wu, who's a motor learning expert, kind of equates it to cooking, right? So if you're cooking a recipe, right, what do? You taste it. If it doesn't taste good, what do? You add a little salt and take a little of this away, and you stir it up and you taste it again. And literally that's what a golf instructor can do when they use the ground reaction force plates, like the Suncalous plate, right? If you don't like the result, which is the ball flight or the club movement or whatever, let's say, okay, well, I'm going to make a hypothesis that a little more torque and a little less horizontal is going to work for that. And then what do? Well, you implement drills to try to make that happen. And so one simple drill that we found, if you want more rotation and less horizontal, is to narrow your stance. Narrowing your stance allows you to rotate a lot easier and makes it a little harder to go side to side. Perfect. Let's try that. And because that's one of the simplest changes to make, right? If you just narrow your stance a little bit. And that's one thing that you can kind of dial in with the Suncalous plate is the distance between your 2 feet. Because, I mean, a lot of biomechanists will talk to you about, you know, the way your body moves is dependent on how far apart your feet are. So if I put my feet really far apart, that makes my body move in a certain way. And if I narrow my feet and there's a guy in California, Dr. David Wright, I don't know if you ever heard of his stuff, but he has a bunch of tests to try to dial in your stance width to make sure it's optimal for you. But I mean, I think that's something that, you know, I've found with some golf instructors have told me that stance width is something that's super easy to fix. So I think it was, I can't remember which, one of the PGA Tour coaches told me that his player, when he goes to like the British Open and it's windy and it's like his stance tends to get really wide, which alters his swing characteristics. And then when he'd come back to the US after the Open Championship, you know, he would ask him, you know, or, you know, try to make some changes in his swing. And a lot of times, you know, players can get argumentative, especially really good players. They're like, what are you talking about? Is that like, and so like he literally puts them on the plate and has them hit a shot. And then he loads up his swing from, you know, 3 months ago when he was hitting it really well. He loads up his swing from today. And if they both show the stance width and one of them is 25 inches and one 22 inches, you're like, okay, well, what do you think now? And then the best part about Suncalous is it syncs with the launch monitor data. So literally you can load up his swing from 3 months ago when he was striping it.
Yeah.
And you have all these characteristics and the launch monitor data. And you're like, you remember that day? Like, look at your path, look at your face, look at your speed. This is that little fade you like to hit or whatever it is, right? And then look at today. Now the path's way out to the right. You're hitting these big swoopy draws, like, and your stance is really like they can't really argue with that anymore, right? It's fact now. And I think when you're dealing with good players who kind of start having an idea that they know what they're talking about, and I don't think that's just good players. I think that's everyone. You know, I'm sure you've had it in the past where you've given a lesson where somebody was, you know, they watch something on YouTube or whatever, right? They get argumentative and they think they kind of know what they're doing. And if you have facts to show them.
I think the other thing is when you look at launch monitor data like Trackman, you are looking at degrees.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I say to some of the kids, right, okay, so here's a protractor.
Yeah.
That's 1 degree, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you are, I don't know, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, whatever.
Yeah. Right.
To move you a couple of degrees or something to make it easier for you to play the shot is such a fraction.
It is, yeah.
It's too easy to go 23 degrees.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
yeah,
I think that the thing that when we're talking about horizontal and the torque, right?
Yeah.
That just by moving where the feet are positioned,
totally, yeah.
The angles they're at.
Yeah, so flaring the feet is another way to get people more rotational, right? So if you flare their feet, they're more likely to spin and rotate. So narrowing and flaring would be a more torque type of setup, or a more rotational type of setup, and squaring them up and widening them would be a more horizontal type setup. And so that's all the stuff that you I mean, and I think that's my job, is to give instructors like yourself more tools in your toolbox, because I'm sure you have ways. Sorry, go ahead.
You've only got to move a foot 10 degrees.
Sometimes not even that. Yeah.
You could move the path or whatever to the right, or like I say, you could. Yeah. You've changed the positioning of the foot. Yeah. Now you've lost some of the sway.
Yeah.
You've increased the rotation, and now you're back on. Now you're somewhere near what you want.
Totally.
What I think sometimes we forget is that it's measured in degrees,
which are tiny little. I mean, it's meters. 1/360th of a circle. Yeah, 360th of a circle. Yeah, it's tiny little. Yeah.
It's minute.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that I think, you know, like Mark Brody's and the strokes gain stats has really helped us realize how friggin' hard this game is. Because like, I mean, if you look at this you know, tour statistics for like from 150 yards on average, tour players hit it to like, what is it, 20 feet or something like that. Like, and you'll see, you know, guys out on, you know, chops out on the course who hit it to, you know, 40 feet from 150 yards and they get all upset. I'm like, that's pretty damn good. And you know, the difference between hitting it to like 15 feet and hitting it to 40 feet is like a quarter of the half of a dimple, you know, and a 1 degree. And like, I'm amazed we ever hit it close to the hole. Like, it's such a hard game.
But you see, sometimes you even with this with the feet and everything is that players make a swing,
Mm-hmm.
and whenever someone's trying to change something
Yeah.
mechanically,
Yeah.
it's quite a difficult process,
Right.
irrelevant of what it is.
Sure.
And
And I think that's where I've learned a lot from my motor learning friends. So my buddy Will Wu, who's a motor learning expert in LA, and John Dunnigan, he works quite a bit with, who's out of the Philly area. And I've actually experimented with this quite a bit, and it's a really good way to get people to dial in what they want. So let's say I work with you for a bit and I figure out, your torque needs to be whatever it is, 47 Newton meters of torque, which to you is absolutely meaningless, right? You don't even know what that means. But if I teach you, okay, torque is kind of pushing your feet forward and backwards and creating that rotation, and I can make you kind of feel it with some bands or pulling and pushing on you some way. I'm like, so your optimal is 47, okay? And you're like, okay, cool. I'm like, now swing and try to make it 20. Like hit the ball and make a swing and try to make that little yellow graph say 20 and not 47. And so in your brain, you have to interpret, okay, well, how do I make it less? And then you swing and then you get feedback from the swing cattle and it says, okay, it went down to 27. Okay, close. You went down, but not as much as we wanted. Okay, I want this one to be 77. I want more. And so John Dunnigan calls that the Goldilocks phenomenon, right? So if you know what 47 feels or 67 feels like, and you know what 27 feels like, it's way easier for your brain to find 47 of whatever these units are, right? And so that's educating the human. And like, I remember when I first started working with those guys, like I struggle with an inside-out path and a hook. And Will was working with me a little bit on it, and I was getting really good, and I was hitting some good shots. He's like, "Hey, on this next one, I want your path to be like 12 out to the right." And I was like, "What are you smoking? Like, didn't I tell you? Like, I told you I don't like to hook it." And he's like, "No, like hit it 12 out to the right, because if you know what that feels like, and you know what 10 to the left feels like, then finding 2 to the right is much easier for your brain." And so that's a really cool way to teach human beings, because we're really good if we know the edges to find the middle. And if we don't know where the edges are and we're just swinging in the middle all the time, then our brains aren't calibrated and and it makes it really hard. And that's not what you would normally do in a golf lesson, right? Normally in a golf lesson, if you get people hitting it well, what do you say? Well, keep hitting them the way you're hitting them. And then all your brain knows is this, and it doesn't know where that is. So it becomes really hard to find that next day on the first tee. But if your brain really knows where that is and where that is, then finding the middle becomes a lot easier. And so that's why using the technology is really cool. So like asking people to, give me like more horizontal, give me less horizontal. Okay, now give me your optimal one, and kind of jumping back and forth so they really kind of get an idea. And then they see, what does the ball do when I get more horizontal? And they watch it and like, oh, okay, that's cool. I understand how that starts to curve left when I get less horizontal. Okay, now it starts to curve a little right. Okay, now I get in the middle. Okay, and then that helps them self-correct, right? When they're on the golf course or we're on the, if they see one that really hooks, they're like, okay, because that gives them hope, right? If you hit a hook all the time, you don't know why, then you have no hope, right? You're just like, oh man, I'm hitting too hard, I suck. Or if you hit a hook, you're like, oh, I get that. I remember when I glide too much, that causes a hook. So cool, let me just do a couple practice swings, get rid of that little glide, and okay, perfect. My next one will be great. And so
I think that's quite interesting, really, because if I think of, say, Formula One, right? And I don't know, Lewis Hamilton's in the car, and the team would say to him, look, you're coming into the corners too quick, so you can't get out of them, or your positioning on the road isn't at the right area in order to get around quicker, right? Right. So if you come into the corner, aren't they, X mile an hour slower, into that area, you'll come out quicker. Right?
Yeah.
And what you almost think what they're doing is they're educating him to become faster. They're not telling him how to drive.
No.
If you can come into that speed into there, then you can come out quicker. And
and the only problem with that analogy is, if you get it wrong, you could die, right?
But
whereas in golf, if you get it wrong, whatever, the ball goes a little sideways.
But if you look at it in golf, like what you've just said there, right? If you come in on that way or you move that way, you get that.
Yeah.
If you keep coming in on that way, you'll keep getting that.
Right.
And sometimes the education side actually. I know. Okay, so now
I agree. And I like the education side in terms of just explaining it to them, but I like the experiential side of hey, let's do this and see what happens. Let's do this and see what happens. And to me, that allows them to be more independent thinkers and learners and understanders, rather than. And that's the difference between like cognitive learning strategies or motor learning strategies. So like in motor learning, it's actually a good strategy to make them screw it up royally like do the opposite of what I told you, do it completely wrong, just so your brain feels what that's like. And in a cognitive learning strategy, you would never do that. You would never take somebody and you teach them how to do math and say, okay, 2 + 2 = 97. Way to go. Good job. Like you would never tell them to do it completely wrong and give them credit for it. But in a motor learning strategy, it makes sense because your brain needs to know what that wrong feels like on both ends so that it can find whatever it needs to find in the middle. And that's why that's a really good use for technology in golf instruction, because then you get the feedback. Like, okay, I felt like I created more torque there. What was it? Oh yeah, okay, it actually was more torque. Hey, cool. And then I validated my feel. Okay, I felt like I created more torque there, but then the torque actually goes down. You're like, okay, well that didn't work. So whatever I was trying there maybe isn't an appropriate strategy to, and that's the same thing with path and angle of attack and face angle and all those things, right? You could do the same thing with all of those things to try to figure out how to, or to educate the golfer how to, okay, I want you to shut your face like 5 degrees to the target line on this next one. And the next one, I want you to open your face 5 degrees to the target line. And then you have the feedback from the launch monitor and then once they do that and they see what the ball does, when they do that, then they equate, okay, this type of motion and this type of feel equates to that type of ball flight. And so now I know how to fix it, because now I know, okay, well, I can go to the other end of it, which is obviously going to get rid of whatever that pattern is. And so, and I think that's something that, really good players are really good at, at whatever their ball flight is doing on that particular day, of managing it and figuring out how to make it work on that particular day. Because as you know, this game's really hard, and the next day could be completely different from this day, and so you have to have the ability to manage, what's going on with your body and all that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who've said, if you're equipping a player to go to war, is what someone called it.
Yeah.
Right? You better make sure they've got the tools to deal with it, right?
100%, yeah.
And, I talked to Mark Blackburn yesterday, and he kept saying they need to be able to deal with what's going to happen. It's not going to be perfect.
No, never is, yeah.
And what's this afternoon, my Litland football account, they were having a talk from a special forces soldier who'd been on the mental side of sport.
Yeah.
And he basically said, when I went to war, before we went on a mission, we had to decide what's the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? What's
Right.
the worst thing that can happen? He said, because we need to prepare ourselves for what the worst thing that's going to happen is, right?
Right.
Because if it doesn't happen,
it's a success.
There's no point. The idea was there's no point going there thinking this is going to be perfect.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
No.
If when you get there, it all goes wrong. Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think all going wrong and you prepared for those situations, right? So if it goes wrong in this fashion, I have a strategy. I know, like, so if this happens, then I can do this, and that will help, even if it goes wrong. To me, like, if it all goes wrong and you don't have a strategy to deal with it, I think that's the best. That's what creates anxiety. That's what creates people's aim, right? Because if I don't have a strategy to deal with whatever's going wrong, then I feel hopeless, right? Whereas if I go out there and my first tee shot slices into the woods, and I think to myself, oh, I remember on the practice tee when I was doing too much torque, that get my path to the left with an open face. Okay, cool. So let me just get a little more, take a couple of practice swings and feel that little more glidey, kind of lay it down out to the right. Okay, cool. And then, then it becomes, every bad shot's a learning experience, and you go back to your database of practice to figure out what might have caused that, and move on from there. And so I think that's what helped my game a lot too, is understanding why shots do what they do, and then understanding in my body, because in my body it's different, right? Why my ball hooks could be way different from why your ball hooks. And so just knowing the ball flight laws, I didn't think really helped me with my own game. It was more understanding how my body alters the ball flight laws, which is different for everyone, which is why the technology is so cool.
Well, I think the other thing is, if you take good players and you look at how many good shots they hit per round or shots they want, then you can almost count them on hand.
Sure, totally. I think educating amateur golfers to that is that, hey, like if you talk to Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy, they might hit 2 or 3 shots that start on the line they wanted to, curve in the direction they wanted to, land where they wanted to, and do everything like as they planned. So this game is a game of mistakes, right? It's a game of limiting your mistakes and trying to find it and do it again. And so, I think that's a really good strategy to take with people. And I remember Sean Foley telling me that the best thing he liked about the shot strokes gained thing was it tempered his players' expectations. Because like Rosie would hit it to 15 feet from 50 yards and be pissed off. And when he was pissed off, he would, probably miss the putt because he was still angry from the shot. But then when he educated him, hey, 15 feet from 150 yards is like 5 feet better than the average PGA Tour. You're beating like more than 60% of the field if you hit it to 15 feet. He's like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. And then he's in a better mood. He probably makes a putt, and everything goes better. So even the best in the world need that kind of education. That it's really hard. This game is really damn hard, and your goal is to kind of minimize your errors or your mistakes and understand when you do make an error or mistake, why that happened, and obviously hopefully be able to.
What I find quite interesting is, what strategies do they use when it's going wrong? Because the reality is it's going wrong all the time, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very rare,
right?
For whatever reason, whether they're under pressure, they're not feeling great, a bit of adversity, bad bounces, whatever.
Yeah.
It's all going wrong, right?
Yeah.
The strategy to get the ball around the golf course on that day, right,
yeah.
and still be in the tournament at the end of the day is massive, isn't it? Because you could go out there, slice it off the first tee, make 8, right?
Yeah.
And think, oh, that's it, tournament's over, go home, collapse, right?
Yeah.
But you get some players who've gone over there, tournaments, but they still finish level par, come in, and it's been a real fight. It's mentally tiring, physically tiring. But at the end of the day, they're still in the tournament. So they get back on the range, they get the feel back for what they want, go out the next day, and they're in top 10, good into round 3.
Yeah.
And you're like, the strategies, the almost this ability or understanding biomechanically of what can affect what can I do, or how do I affect that ball flight?
Yeah, so, and I think that's where
degree of control.
Yeah, really good. I mean, coaches come up with different strategies for different players because, with Justin Rose, it would be, well, I got to get my hip a little deeper and my arm more across my chest, and I need to get a little more wrist flexion or whatever. It could be really complicated, things where. I was talking with my good friend Tony Ruggiero, who works with Lucas Glover, the other day, and most of the time he hates to hit pulls, and most of the time they figured out his pulls are a ball position issue. And so they've done the work to figure out, hey, when you start pulling it, it's probably because the ball's sneaking forward in your stance. So that it gives him hope. Like, hey, I've hit a pull, no problem. It's probably the ball's just sneaking forward in my stance. I need to move it back a little further. And then he's also, if I can get into my heel on my backswing, it means I've turned my hip back and I'm not gliding too much. And so, a lot of people think, when we're working with the best in the world, that they have different, more complex things going on. And it actually almost is the opposite sometimes. You got to break it down very simply, but I think it depends on the human too. So some human beings want very simple, dead stupid cues to do or dead simple drills to do, where other people, might want to dig into things a little bit more. And I think that's where really good coaches can read the human in front of them and give them what they need or what they are looking for.
Well, the thing is, at the end of the day, if you're stood in the middle of the fairway, right, winds off the right, you've got to hit it little cut against it into a back pin, slightly higher than normal because the greens are harder, right? You can't be thinking, if I get, it's
no, and I think that's where a lot of times you go back to your natural pattern, whatever that is. And so to me, my miss really is that inside out, really, hooky type swing. And I think that comes from my natural horizontal. And I think under pressure, that does show up quite a bit. And so it's becoming knowing that and saying, hey, okay, I'm under pressure now. I know that's going to cause this too much glidey type swing. So what can I do to manufacture a swing to that back right pin? So do I just have to stand super open to it so that even though I'm from the inside, and so I think that's the kind of cool stuff that, I've talked to Sean Foley quite a bit, and he said, Justin Rose, the last shot at Marion, he had a 4-iron from 2 whatever, and the ball was above his feet. He struggled with a left miss too. He hates to miss the left. Ball was above his feet. The green slope from right to left. The wind was going from right to left. Everything was taking that ball to his left, and he somehow manufactured a shot that put it in to, and made the putt and won the U.S. Open. It's funny. He says that Justin Rose, if he watches that swing, he like throws up. He hates the look of that swing. But in that extreme pressure situation, he figured out a way to manufacture to not go left, right, and to hit the shot that he needed to. So
And it makes
he's
you wonder,
probably
how much education is already in there,
yeah.
but
Oh, it's
you
all
can
there.
literally
Yeah,
pull it out like that. You know what I mean?
yeah,
You're not, you ain't stood over it going, oh, I need to get that, or I need to. You almost
yeah,
probably hours of experimenting, or you
yeah.
know, different
And I think that's
feel.
why that Goldilocks drill is the best one because you're literally just experimenting. So like, you get up over the ball and the instructor says, I want you to get like, you know, 15 Newton meters more torque on this shot, more rotational force from the ground. And then you hit it and you look and you say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let me try something else. And so that experimenting, and I think all good players do that on the range, is kind of that experimental thing so that when they, get under the gun, they have more tools at their disposal to try to, or more feels or more whatever it is, right? Mental processes to try to get them to hit the shot that they need. So that's something that I highly recommend every golf instructor to use as part of their lesson is whatever you find in their swing that you think is working, try to get them to do more, try to get them to do less, and notice what the ball does when you do more or when you do less, because then that can really help them when they're under that extreme situation. That's why the technology is great with the launch monitors and the ground reaction force plates and all that stuff that give you like immediate feedback right after you hit the shot that pops up right away and you can see. And the problem obviously with those things is you can only do them in a very controlled environment, right? Like on a flat lie, like there's no ground reaction force plates currently that can go on a side hill, downhill lie and a slippery rough with all those things. So that's playing the game. That's the next step, I think, once you get it on the flat lie in normal conditions that you can do it properly. But yeah,
And I
that's the
think
fun thing to me.
I think
Sorry,
you,
go ahead.
you've also got that player's perception of what they feel like they're doing. So
100%.
I always think to myself, I'm a believer that the eyes are so powerful in this whole system, and
Right.
that where you position your head, your neck, your eyes have a vast influence on
Yeah.
your perception of where the club's going to hit the ball from. So,
Yep.
for me, when you think that you're actually not on top of the ball like putting, the ball's in
Yeah.
front of you, you're
Yeah.
angled over, your head's on a tilt, right? Your your ability, and with all our eyes that probably slightly different in terms of
100%. Yeah.
long-sighted, short-sighted, etc. You've got
Yeah.
the position of your head. You've got whether it's directly in your view or your peripheral vision, right? And the ball's over there, and you have a perception of fire at that point, don't you? Or straight,
Yeah.
where the top, right? So you have a perception of straight, and for me, wherever you stand, you have a perception of where that target is, and
Yeah.
that when you look at the pressure shifts and everything, right? You could find that a player only has to try and draw the ball, right, and it
Yeah.
creates the right trace, or
Yeah.
fades and it creates a better trace,
Totally.
but
Yeah. No, they definitely have an
until you've
effect on each
stood
other
there,
for sure.
yeah, until you've actually stood on them,
Yeah.
and hit a shot and gone, well, you're miles that way, no torque or loads, or
Right.
you move massively.
Yeah.
They would know.
No, no, and I think that helps with the buy-in from them. If you can show them, hey, look at this and look at where that ball went. And so to me, that's what the technology can really help with, especially with, younger kids these days who, technology is their whole lives, right? That everything they do is on technology. And so having them to quantify their feels basically is what technology is great for. And you don't want to become too dependent on it. That's really key because you'll see people that like I see kids on the range sometimes they hit a shot, they don't even look at where the ball goes and they're back looking at that Trackman numbers. And so
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
you have to be careful as the coach to take that away and actually have them. I think a cool drill is to shut off the TV screen or whatever showing the numbers and have them hit and say, okay, guess what that was? What do you think? And so like hit it like you would on the course, watch the ball flight, feel what your body felt, and then try to guess those numbers. Whether it's the ground reaction force numbers or the pressure numbers, like I do a lot of times because good players are very consistent about the amount of pressure they get into their trail side on the backswing. So between players, it's super variable, but within a player, it's super consistent. And so I'll have players, hit a shot. Like we'll do some work on Trackman or on Suncalous first, so they have an idea what it feels like to start with the numbers. Then I'll shut off the TV screen completely and say, okay, hit a shot now and get 85% into your trail side, maximally. Okay, now hit a shot and get 65% into your trail side. And then after they hit the shot, you turn on TV or you ask them to guess. What do you think that one was? Oh, I didn't do that very well that time. I think that was only 60 or 75% or whatever it is, right? And then you turn it on and then I can see what it actually was, and they can quantify their feels so they know what optimal for them is. Because like once you dial in optimal for them on the swing cat, then it can become shutting off the screen and quantifying their feel, so they know what too much and too little feels like, because it's going to be different in every single person. It's crazy in some like really good players who are dialed into around a certain pressure shift. If you say, I want you to have like 2% less pressure into your trail side, which is like not a lot. Like if you see it on a swing cat plate and you put like 65% of your pressure in your right foot, you make it 63, it's like barely anything moving.
You just
but like some
pocket, wouldn't you?
yeah, totally. And some players are like, man, that felt like I was like stacked over top of it, and it's only like 2% different or whatever, right? So good players get really calibrated around their feels, and those small changes they're super like cognizant of them. And it's the same thing with like, paths and face and stuff like that. Like I'm sure a really good player can feel a 2-degree difference in their path from the previous shot to the next shot. Whereas, beginners probably not that well. And that could be something that, educating, beginners or not very good golfers to be cognizant of those and be able to feel smaller changes like that, I think could be very useful to them. Because then you have the skill or the power to alter them, and then the education to know how to do that when you need it to happen. And the problem is, everybody's going to be different. Like the way that I alter my horizontal force could be way different from how you need to alter it. Like sometimes you might need a kinematic feel, like move your belt buckle closer to the target at transition or whatever. And I might need, I want to shove or crush the leaf under my right foot at transition. And both of those could accomplish the same goal in you and me, but they're completely different types of cues, right? So you just have to have all of those things in your toolbox, I think, as a coach, to be able to help every player.
And it's knowing which bit to change or adjust.
Yeah,
because
that's why you
could look at pressure shift and you go, well, his path's a little bit out to the right. We could do with losing some of the horizontal so that he can bend it back round. That'll square him up. But at the same time, his arms are up here.
Yeah.
So you're thinking, well, if your arms are up there, you're gonna have to get this.
You're gonna need some horizontal to get them down. Yeah, totally. So it's a balancing game for sure. And I think that's where, it'd be the same thing, for like a chef. And that's what I like, the chef analogy, right? I add a little bit of salt. Like too much salt it's terrible, and not enough salt and it's terrible. We got to find the optimal amount. But you don't only need salt, right? You need pepper, you need flour, whatever. Like you need all the ingredients to be in the perfect, proportions to make a good meal. And what your brain likes in terms of a certain amount of spice or whatever, it wouldn't be what my brain likes in terms of a certain amount of spice. And that's the same with golfers, right? You might need more horizontal and less vertical and a little more torque, and that makes it a perfect mixture for you, which ultimately ends up in a good golf shot. Whereas myself might be the opposite, right? I got to really pump up torque and try to turn down horizontal because I know my natural pattern is to get a ton of it already. And so giving me a horizontal cue is like the worst thing you can do for me, but giving you a horizontal cue might help you. And so, you have to have all those and be able to tune those dials. Sorry, go ahead.
What I find quite interesting there, Scott, is that if we... You've probably seen loads of players where they're let's say their pressure shifts too much
into their trail sides. Yeah.
So you would look at the data and go, actually, he's got too much horizontal force in that.
Yeah.
Then you could either talk to the player about there's too much horizontal, so can we feel like we reduce it? And you might subconsciously change something else to do it.
Right? Yeah.
Or you'd look at that, let's say, with the coach and go, yeah, but you know what? You could do with reducing this torque, right? Why is he doing it? Why has he got so much in there?
100%. Yeah. So, and I've actually had that happen where I'm working with a really good player and I think they need, say, more torque. And I give them a cue and they add more torque, and like the torque graph goes up on the plate, and the launch monitor gives us better things, whether speed goes up or the ball does more better things. But then they look at me with this look on their face. They're like, yeah, I don't like that. So whatever it is about the feel of that shot, even if it created a good shot, they don't like it or whatever it is, right? So there could be some, I don't know, whatever it is. There's some mental baggage there that maybe they've tried that as a kid, or they just don't like how that. And then you got to find a better way to do it, because even though it worked, I mean, biomechanically it worked, and in terms of the club delivery it worked. Sometimes I'll just look at the player's face, and if you look at their face and they're like, "Oh my God, look at that shot, that was amazing," then you got them, right. You got a cue that works, and you can work around it. But when they hit it, they just go, nah, nah. Then you obviously got to find a different strategy to try to accomplish the same goal, or like you say, go down a different path. If you want to go down a different path and say, well, let's just make this horizontal force work for you. So maybe we need to change your grip, or we need to change something else to make the horizontal path work for you, so that you can hit little draws instead of little fades, or whatever it is. Because we've worked quite a bit with Matt Kuchar on the plate, and Matt Kuchar just absolutely hates to see the ball go left. His coach, Chris O'Connell, tells us if he can work on something and it'll work amazing for like months and months and months, and as soon as he hits one ball left, he's like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going back to my old like pull fade kind of wipey thing that he does. And he owns one of our swing cat plates. Like, he bought one for his house, because we've worked with him a ton on the plate, and I can get him. I've done it a couple times. I can get him 12 to 15 miles an hour extra in like a couple minutes just by changing. But it introduces the possibility of the left miss, and he doesn't like that. So whatever it is, I think he lost his card early in his career hitting it left. And so even though to me, mechanically, that's more, and like the launch monitor numbers look better to me, but under the gun, he knows that if, something happens and he hits one left, then that's his mental baggage that, and that's the thing. When you get him all that speed, he doesn't get excited. He's just kind of like, yeah, I kind of feel like this one might go left. And he gives you that kind of face that you're like, okay, cool. We got to find another strategy to make this work. So, and that's the best part about it. I mean, I think your guys' job is so fun, because every single person is a little puzzle to solve, right? And it's never going to get boring, because everybody's different. Everybody has different paths. Everybody has different,
It's where it gets, let's say, it's where the root issue is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of them who's, I like the detail tight. So I like the bits tight to start with. So there's relative to the intention of the shot we're going to play. So everybody might be subtly different, whether it be hand position, etc. But they might look similar because there's a similar loading pattern, or that they're working a similar way to produce speed. But I know through experience that, I might have a player who for instance, lifts it a little more. Looks very similar to a lot of them because of his build and size, lifts it a bit more. So you just know he's going to shift a touch more. And then
it has to.
So we might work on keeping it a little tighter so that the arms and the body can work together, because that way he can manage that horizontal through the ball, which controls the path.
100%. And that's why, really good coaches have for years. I mean, I'm sure people have been doing this for years, but you've been mainly working from the kinematic end, right? You're watching movements and you're trying to manage it. And I'm positive you were making changes in ground forces. If you talk about club movement changes, the ground will feel something different. So if I get up there and do something different with the club, the ground will feel something different. It has to, because you've done a different movement, and the ground will feel something different because of that. And so, but that doesn't work for everyone. Like, sometimes giving them club movement cues doesn't work. And so if you have ground movement or ground force cues as well as club movement cues, then you have the whole package. And so you can kind of say, well, because I'm sure you've had some, lessons where you're trying to say, well, I want you to, move your elbow differently or whatever, and it doesn't seem to work. And if you had, okay, well, let's try this, and let's try to, push your foot towards the barn over there, or whatever it is.
Well, I remember a long time ago, and I used to work with a physiotherapist, so that's where my background for the biomechanics and the physiology side of it, I started to see a lot clearer. And I remember standing there and him going, well, just put your arm out. Okay. Well, now your pressure's moved right. And I go, can't still the same place? No, let's move.
No, it has, 100%.
Center of gravity's moved, so it's going to be that. And you go, okay, right, now do, I feel that. But there's, where that trace is from front of foot to heel could be as simple as where the hands are.
Sure, that would change it for sure.
That pressure movement on let's say on a normal pressured plate, can either match up with the swing, or the two can be fighting one another. It's trying to
100%.
get
Yeah.
that in, and then it just
Yeah.
looks
Well,
completely
and
out of
that's
hand.
where, like, from the Suncalous work we've done, we found that, if you get 90% into your trail side, you're going to need a lot of horizontal force, right? Because you got to get yourself back to the front leg. And if you only stay about 80%, we call that a very centered pivot, and you need torque. And if you stay stacked on your left leg, then you're going to need vertical force too. And so that's where we can find mismatches. I think that's what you're talking about. So if I find a player who's getting 90% into their trail side, but they have a maximum amount of torque, like the torque is, or sorry, the vertical is big and the horizontal isn't that big, that's a mismatch there. Or if they're staying stacked up on their lead side and they have a ton of horizontal force, that's a mismatch. And so matching the pressure shift to the resultant ground reaction force, I think, is something that you can make a lot of really easy changes in people to fix those types of things. But then you have to decide which way do you want to go. So if I'm stacked up on my lead side, I only get about 60% into my trail side, and I have a maximum horizontal force. What do I do? Do I try to get them more to the right side with their pressure shift, or do I try to just pump up the verticals and bring down the torquey? I mean, there's two different ways you can go about that, or bring down the
You see,
horizontal.
you see, it's interesting in it because you could have somebody who's stacked on their left side,
Yeah,
rotates quite flat,
yeah,
right? Gets it behind them,
yeah.
and if you have vertical, could hit it sideways.
You could,
It's
100%.
such a balance,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it
Because
it is. It
you
is the balance.
well, he's round, but he measures left post,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
you either want to change that or that.
Or that, and that's where, I mean, I think with Mike Adams' test, you can try to get a, like, if you put him through some tests and you say, well, if he's more of a centered post and he's like tilting front side and stacking on the backswing, then you're like, okay, well, I want to change the pressure shift there for sure. Whereas, and that's where you can make a better guess. But even if you're not using Mike Adams' test and you're not making a guess, I mean, you try one thing and I mean, literally, I think the best strategy is to use every lesson like an n equals one study, like a little mini scientific study. Because what do you do in science? Well, you analyze whatever's going on in the world and you make a hypothesis. And then you say, okay, well, let's test that hypothesis. So you're analyzing this, say he's stacked up and he's very flat. And so I think I want to get him more into his trail side because that would match it a little better. And so you made a hypothesis and then you implement that hypothesis. You give him a drill to get more into the trail side. Then you look what happens and you confirm or deny your hypothesis. And if it gets worse, you're like, okay, let's go back to the other way. Let's try to figure out, a different strategy to get after this. And I think if you work your golf lessons very systematically like that, I think, by the end of them, most people will get better and you'll find things much more quickly. And as you use the plates more often, I think you start making better guesses. So you get there a lot more quickly. And that's what, our ambassadors who have used the plates quite often say that, most of the time they would get there eventually, but they get there so much more faster with the plate. And then if you get there faster with the plate, then you can do more of the Goldilocks thing to make the movement stick so that they're better on the first tee the next day. Because if it takes you
I think
55 minutes of,
I think that's a big part of it, though. The knowledge of
yeah,
how you learn or how the brain processes information, you
yeah,
know, in order
right,
to correct the shot. Because,
yeah,
like you say, whether it's a launch monitor or a force plate, it's just giving me data.
yeah,
It's not telling me what to do. It's just giving me
no,
data.
no,
But if you can understand how the brain processes information
yeah,
to make the change quicker,
yeah.
that data will all line up in seconds, won't it? It's when
Yeah,
you
it,
go
it
through.
generally goes quicker. Yeah, for sure. And I think
It's
Scott had a question here on the bottom. Isn't the post test static, which is totally different than dynamic posting? And I agree 100%. So Mike Adams' posting test is a static test. It's a kinematic position at the top of the backswing. So it's basically where your center of mass is relative to your base of support. So if your center of mass is more towards your right foot, you're a rear post. If it's more towards your left foot, you're a left post. If it's more in the center, you're a center post. Whereas I think the dynamic leg dominance tests that we're doing now with Ben Shear and with some of the stuff I'm doing with Suncalous gives us more information about the relative contribution of each leg to the downswing. And I think I really like what you were talking about earlier with the eyes. How you look at the ball, because I think your dominant eye is going to have a big effect on how you try to get a good view of that ball, and it'll have a good effect then of how your body moves. And I've heard a lot of people in putting talk about dominant eyes and how you use that to aim better. And to me, if I'm talking about ground reaction forces or how I use my lower body to hit the golf ball, I might want to know what my dominant leg is, what my strongest, most stable,
Yeah,
dominant leg is. And that's the kind of testing that we're doing now with Ben Shear does a lot of cool stuff with that, with his resistor releaser tests. And then I'd have some, and to me, I think I like the quantification of tests rather than like, a subjective kind of test. So with
Well,
Mike's test, you turn back and you look at it and say, I think he's center, I think he's front, I think he's rear, versus like putting a number behind it with the technology.
Something in my head says to me, if I was going to measure somebody's body,
Yeah.
right? So if I said, right, this is the length of your hand, this is the proportion finger to palm, right?
Yeah.
Your hand, right, on the golf club would work better there because of the size.
Yeah.
I'd go, okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
In the way, like you said, if it's a test on the legs, which would say, actually, you use that leg better, that would great. I get that.
Yeah.
That physiologically sound.
Right.
But sometimes I think I could change it depending on what I'm doing that day or what somebody's told me. Because, magicians can make you think things or make you say things. You go, where'd that come from? They can sow seeds.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Sow seeds
No,
in your
definitely.
mind so that when you do something, that's what you do.
Right. And that's where I think, with the dominant leg testing, in science, what you want to do is intraday and inter-subject repeatability or reliability of tests. So like if I was working with a really good junior player and I wanted to know what their post was, I would bring them back, multiple days in a row or test it every week and see, do I get the same answer? And if you do continue to get the same answer, then that solidifies your brain that we're going down the right road in terms of their golf mechanics. If it's variable, then I think it might be a testing issue, right? Your test might be not that good, or maybe there's something to do with that human's body that is different all the time. And so you're like, what happened this week versus last week? Or did you injure your ankle playing basketball or soccer or football or whatever? Like, so, and I think that's what shoes are big. Yeah, that could definitely change it. Yeah.
You're on a different surface.
Yeah.
I could have hurt my leg last week. You know what I mean?
Right.
I could be listening to what someone said during the week, so I think that's right, so I do that.
Yeah.
There's so many influences, isn't there? There's so many influences on.
Yeah. But that's where a good test, a good test should give you the same answer no matter what. And that's where, that's what we're doing a lot of research into now, are these dominant leg testing. And to me, a good scientific test needs to be reliable and valid. So reliable means you get the same answer every time, and valid means you're actually measuring what you think you're measuring. And so the reliability piece is easy to measure. Like, can we do this test repeatedly on people and get the same answer? Yeah. So if I test you today, I test you tomorrow, and I text you next Saturday, and I get the same answer all the time, that's some good reliability. And because obviously, sorry, go ahead.
I think the other thing is, some tests probably better than no test.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke to Terry the other night, and it's great, right? But I think even his tests will get better.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that's part of my job, I think, with that gang, because I've hung out with Mike and Terry, is to try to take those tests and make them, more reliable and more valid. And because, the ideas behind them are brilliant. Because, he's the first, Mike Adams is the first person that I know that has a system of doing that thing that I call cluster analysis, right? Putting a little dot or a little circle around certain people and saying, hey, these people need these things in their swings, and these people need those things in their swings. So I don't think it's a good test if you need Mike Adams' eye to see it, right? Because Mike Adams will do the post test sometimes, and he'll be like, oh, that guy's center for sure. And I'm like, really? I don't see that. But if I have a number behind it and I can measure it, it makes it way easier on me and everybody else, right? So,
Scott, it's been ace, mate. We're going to get kicked off in 50 seconds.
All right. Sounds good, buddy. Well, let me know. We're still on lockdown here, so let me know if we want to do this again.
We'll be doing this again, don't worry.
Awesome. Sounds good, man.
I'll come up with some more ideas and have a bit more thinking.
Perfect.
I think I'll come up with something else. But
awesome.
I really appreciate your time. It's been amazing again. Thank you.
Sounds good, man. You have yourself a great night.
You too.
Bye
See
now.
you, buddy.
Bye now.